Legalization of pot in the United States. My take on it: there was a famous author that once quoted, "To smoke or not to smoke? That is the question. To smoke or not to smoke." And I'm going to start out with my personal story. I started smoking pot when I was probably 8 years old. And how I got into it was my dad, my adoptive father by chance, was a drug dealer. That's what he did, aside from being a doctor, a psychiatrist. And I had these older friends hanging around that wanted to get these pills that he had. He had like 1,000 jars of Demerol. I mean 1,000 pills, like pharmaceutical sized jars of Demerol, Percodan, Quaaludes when they're Roar 714 and Roar 712, if you know what I'm talking about, before Carolyn Ann Quinlan, before they got rid of the Quaaludes. And there was all these pills around the house and patients coming overnight and all this and that, but I'm kind of getting off the subject, but I'm on it because I really didn't find the pills all that attractive at the time, but I did take a liking to the pot at 8. So I would trade these pills to my older friends that had the pot, and they had really good connections. I mean, you could almost say they were mafia connections. So I got pot from everywhere in the world. I mean, I got Thai stick from Thailand that was dipped in opium. I got Cambodian red that was from Cambodia that made me crawl after I smoked it. It was probably the most potent pot I've ever smoked, but it wasn't, but I'll get into that later. Columbia Gold, multicolored buds from South America, pot from Vietnam, pot from Canada, and our famous halide grown pot in Washington. And fortunately it's legal now. It's about time. You know, it's about time that I got legal, and it's long overdue. There's all these frickin' rednecks that don't know anything about pot. And from what I can tell you after smoking it for 15 years, is it's caused a lot less damage to my brain and a lot less damage to my liver than alcohol. And I've never gotten cancer from pot. Now cigarettes, that's a different story, and that's a different subject. But cigarettes are a whole lot worse for you than pot. So they just want to keep it illegal out of ignorance. You know, I haven't known potheads to really be violent or extreme. Usually they're pretty mellow. I mean, when I used to smoke pot, I used to like watch cartoons. I used to go fishing out my window when I was living on a houseboat. I would just fish and get stoned. You know, I'd listen to really good 70s music when music was good back then. And I got laid quite a bit, and I had a lot of girlfriends. So, you know, pot was never a problem for me. Now, at my job that I kept for 17 years, I smoked pot off and on. But eventually with pot, after about 15 years, I started developing a paranoid state to where I would take a hit and then I would just go instant paranoia. And it's like, who wants to get paranoid? I mean, the euphoric feeling was gone, and I would just get constant paranoia every time I smoked it. They call it paranoid psychosis for pot, and I guess it occurs with some people, and it did with me. And so I quit pot without any real withdrawals and without any really feeling of loss. You know, it was like I was just letting go of something and quitting something, and it wasn't a major issue like alcohol has been for me. And some drugs, you know, I could take it or leave it, more or less. But I did smoke it from morning till night for 15 years. Then I worked with people that smoke pot, and They were highly qualified engineers. We were doing highly dangerous work, sometimes for the military. We were doing some jobs that were so dangerous that they had to evacuate people from the situation. In case there was an accident, there would be major collateral damage and loss of life. And my superiors, some of my bosses, actually smoked pot at work. And unfortunately, they got UA'd and got tested, and some of them got fired, but they got blatant about it. They started smoking pot in front of their superiors, superior commanders and everything, and doing it in an area where they could smell it, and eventually they would get fired. And they were actually good engineers. I worked alongside them. I mean, they saved my life. They trained me. They were really good people. They were excellent workers. They clocked in every day on time. They clocked out. They kept their security clearances. They remained loyal to the country they served. Other than they smoked pot, which was technically illegal, you know, but they were good people. So, and I've met farmers, just regular everyday people that smoke pot, you know. So all the stigma about pot is from a bunch of rednecks that don't have a clue, that don't know anything about it. They might need to smoke some to mellow out. You know, nicotine and alcohol is a lot worse for you than pot. But anyway, so last time I smoked pot, I was growing it, and I lost a bud in a toolbox, and I forgot about it for a year. It was in the bottom of the toolbox. I was growing it illegally in a different country. I mean, I could have been behind bars for a long time if I would have gotten caught, but I saw people getting arrested on TV, so I got paranoid and I quit growing it. And I forgot about this bud in the box, and a year later I was going through my toolbox looking for a special tool, and I found the bud. And the bud talked to me, and it said, well, you know, you better smoke me. You know, it's going to be a complete loss. I mean, you went to all that trouble to grow me and everything, and just throw me out in the garbage would be cruel. And I agreed with Bud entirely, so I lit that sucker up, and I took about 3 hits off it, which was like about 1/8 of the bud, and it just blasted me into another universe. And that was the best pot I ever smoked that I grew myself. But I did my homework. I studied on how to grow it really well. But I never commercially grew pot, and I never sold it. I just grew it for my own use to get stoned. So I think it's really unfair to waste a bunch of police time on these people smoking pot. You know, I think they should have restrictions like alcohol and all that stuff, you know, don't drive when you're stoned and all that, and they're developing tests for it and everything. But I think it should be totally legal like alcohol. And I think they're fighting an uphill battle. You know, it's not potheads that generally rob stores for money, because it's not that expensive. You know, it's the hard drug users. That's a totally another story that I can get into. But, you know, pot is long overdue, and I'm really glad that Washington and the other state made it legal. And I hope that more states make it legal, because it's a waste of police time. And I've talked to people high up, really high up in areas of security in the United States, and they have said that it's a terrible waste of money to keep pot illegal. When there's child molesters, there's frickin' pedophiles, and there's some really sick people out there that want to do some really terrible things to the world. And meanwhile, they're dumping their time and energy onto these harmless potheads. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. You want to dump your energy into the people that are really causing the serious problems in society. So dumping your energy into pothead is a waste of time. And also, it's a racket. It's a vicious game. You know, it's almost like by keeping it illegal, the jails make more money, the police make more money, which the police aren't really happy with it. they'd rather enforce more important crimes, like murders and robberies and stuff than a stupid pothead. And they're wasting their time and energy on something when they could use their services for a much better purpose. And I know that most police believe this. And the people higher up in the FBI believe this. And probably people on higher levels believe this. But the politicians, to get their vote, they gotta kiss the United States' ass. And so half the people in the country, you can tell by the vote, they vote against it being legal. But someday it will be totally legal. And the government will legalize it. And they will be able to spend their money on the real criminals, the real sickos, the real perverts, the child molesters, and the freaking pedophiles, and the really fucking sick people that don't belong on the street, instead of just a bunch of stupid potheads that are getting stoned. I mean, America, you have the right to pursuit of happiness, and if you want to get stoned on your living room on the weekend, that's not harming anybody. I mean, I can see about you don't want to smoke it out in public because you don't want to set a bad example for kids or whatever, until they're able to make an informed decision when they're 18. But, it's just crazy, and it never caused me to do anything violent. It never caused me to rob a bank. It never caused me to do any activities other than growing it and smoking it, so I see pot as being basically harmless and a waste of time of U.S. taxpayers' money. It's ridiculous when the money could be used much wiser. So I hope that you prevail, and I hope that you win your war on legalizing pot.